The GX era was a fun and amazing time to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck construction creativity was at an all-time high, there was a vast diversity in a lot of the formats, and in many regards, it felt like the wild, wild west of Yu-Gi-Oh! A lawless time where if you could build it, it could probably win. Today I'm going to be discussing one of GX's most iconic, fun, and powerful decks. One that not only climbed to the top of the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Mountain, but one that's legacy has lived on for over a decade after winning a Shonen Jump championship. This story is about the legendary Diamond Dude Turbo. Our story begins in very early 2007, late February to be exact, oddly enough with a different deck, or at least a different version of this deck. If you watch my Yu-Gi-Oh! Story Unleash Power or played during this time, you're familiar with the all-powerful Airblade Turbo, the deck that was without a doubt too powerful for any contender in the game to match. Airblade Turbo not only obliterated everything in its path on its way to being tier 0 status in the OCG, but it also dominated the only Shonen Jump championship where it was legal here in the TCG. If the picture I'm painting isn't vivid enough, Airblade Turbo was the full-powered predecessor to Diamond Dude Turbo, and the only thing that stopped its dominance was the Forbidden and Limited list. That particular ban list went into effect March 1st, 2007 and sent Elemental Hero Stratos to limited status. With that change, Airblade Turbo died and Diamond Dude Turbo was born. Despite the stories you may have heard, I won't sugarcoat it. DDT had an arduous start to its competitive life. The expectations for the deck were Shonen Jump Championship right out of the gate. After all, Airblade Turbo was legal at Shonen Jump St. Louis, and not only did it win the event, but the finals was an Airblade Turbo mirror match, proving that it was easily the best deck in the game, and technically when you think about it, only 2 copies of Stratos were lost because of the FNL list. Outside of that, Diamond Dude Turbo still had the insanely high ceiling that made it arguably the most powerful deck in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! This was on full display at the first major event of the new format, which was to be the proving ground for DDT. If Diamond Dude Turbo was still going to be the dominant force many expected, it needed to put at least 3 players into the top 8 of Shonen Jump Houston. That would prove without a doubt that it was still going to be the top deck in the game. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. In fact, it didn't come close. DDT did make it into the prestigious top 8 cut at Houston, but it was just a single player. That player, Chris Perovic, did make it all the way to the finals where he ultimately suffered defeat at the hands of Iman Ganin's Bazoo return. Coming out of this event, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community was almost entirely split on how good Diamond Dude Turbo was as a deck. On one hand, DDT made it all the way to the finals in its first legal showing in the TCG, proving it was a legitimate contender. On the other hand, in terms of the number of players that the deck sent to the top cut, it definitely underperformed. While the deck only lost 2 cards because of the ban list, it would still technically hurt its consistency, and the thing about consistency is it matters in the highest levels of competition. The loss of 2 copies of Elemental Hero Stratos meant the deck wasn't always opening with its perfect starter card that would fetch whatever you needed to get rolling. So essentially the deck went from almost always having what it needed in its opening hand to sometimes having what it needed in that same position. This distinction was obviously huge, and what players learned at Shonen Jump Houston was while DDT was still all-world powerful, the deck had one soon-to-be infamous problem. That problem was its tendency to brick hard. Bricking is when you get an opening hand where you have little to no optimal plays because your cards don't work well together. Every deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be susceptible to bricking even on a minute level, but the key is to get that level down as low as possible. Sadly, this wasn't really a solvable problem for the Diamond Dude Turbo deck. The composition of the deck was one where you had a lot of utility cards that worked great in certain situations or with other specific cards. However, a lot of these same cards like Monster Gate, Magical Stone Excavation, or Lightning Vortex did absolutely nothing by themselves. In fact, they couldn't even be activated without paying a hefty cost. Essentially, having too many cards like these in your opening hand would leave you dead on arrival. But then again, these very same cards could easily be game winning if you hit any one of them off of Destiny Hero Diamond Dude's effect. Because of this feast or famine nature of DDT, many of the early adopters dropped drop the deck after Shonen Jump Houston for Monarch variants. After all, Monarchs have proven themselves to be a consistent meta contender for over a year. Going into Shonen Jump Columbus just 3 short weeks after Houston, it was sink or swim time for DDT. That might seem a little premature considering only one Shonen Jump had taken place in the format, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Players were fickle, and Houston had given us 5 completely different decks and strategies in its top 8, so if players thought DDT was overhyped, they had many other competitive options to choose from. When Columbus finally arrived, once again, everything from Six Samurai and Monarchs to Gadgets and Demise OTK entered the arena for meta supremacy. But on this day, there was one duelist with a fire burning so hot, everything in his path was scorched. Meet U.S. Army Sergeant Mark Glass. Mark had already made somewhat of a name for himself with his performance 1 month earlier. Remember that Shonen Jump at the beginning of our story where Stratos was at 3 and Airblade Turbo ran Rush Shot over the field, ultimately leading to an Airblade mirror match in the finals? Well, Mark Glass was in that finals. He came up short, but he still proved on that day that he was well versed in the deck, a quality that would be on full display at Columbus. While his first performance was very impressive to say the least, his follow-up was nothing short of a pure masterpiece. For starters, Mark went 10-0 in Swiss with Diamond Dude Turbo. After making it to top 8, he would then have to face off against 2 soon-to-be Shonen Jump champions back-to-back, including arguably the greatest Yu-Gi-Oh! Player of all time in Lazaro Bolito. Mark beat both duelists in close games, resulting in him capturing first place at Columbus and having a mind-blowing undefeated final record of 14-0. After Columbus, many wondered just how exactly Mark was able to get DDT to perform so consistently. Well, if you look at his deck, you'll notice he made some very smart decisions in his build. First off, the addition of Card Trooper into the monster lineup made a lot of sense. The fact is, Trooper gave DDT another strong normal summon and one that could dump copies of Divine Sword Phoenix Blade into the graveyard to be later added to the hand. Card Trooper also floated into a draw upon destruction, and it was a level 3 monster, which of course was very important with reasoning, where you want to have as many different monster levels in your deck as possible. Mark also chose to run a very small but impactful trap lineup. This was not the norm, as some DDT players decided to run no traps at all. While traps didn't add much in terms of power to DDT, a card like Threatening Roar, which Mark maxed out on, was excellent when it came to combating OTKs. It's important to note that with decks like Iman Ganin's Bazoo Return, the Demise OTK, or even the DDT Mirror Match, there were a lot of decks in the format that could take you out in a single turn, and by main decking Threatening Roar, Mark ensured that anytime he saw the card, he would immediately have an answer against those decks. Threatening Roar guaranteed that he'd live to see the next turn in hopes that he could turn the tables and OTK his opponent instead. In the event that he played against a slower deck, for instance Gadgets or another control variant, he could easily side out the Threatening Roars for 3 copies of Royal Decree and take trap cards out of the duel completely. After all, he knew that those decks would never have enough offense to OTK him, while a well-timed Royal Decree would shut down almost all of his opponent's defensive options for an easy victory. By the way, if it isn't clear just where all the raw damage came from in DDT, look no further than Dimension Fusion and Dark Magician of Chaos. Diamond Dude Turbo would routinely banish most of its warrior monsters for Divine Sword Phoenix Blade, only to summon back those very same monsters in one fell swoop using Dimension Fusion. Dark Magician of Chaos, which could easily be summoned from the deck using Reasoning or Monster Gates, could retrieve Dimension Fusion even if it was milled to the graveyard in the process. If you didn't hit DMOC, Magical Stone Excavation could serve the same purpose. Also, since the deck ran Jinzo, it would usually summon that prior to using Dimension Fusion to nullify any chance of a blowout trap card like Mirror Force or Torrential Tribute, even in game 1s before you had the chance to side in Royal Decree. If your Dark Magician of Chaos was sent to the graveyard because maybe your opponent called Reasoning right, or you were forced to discard it for one of your utility effects, effects like Lightning Vortex, that wasn't a problem either, as Premature Burial could summon it back from the graveyard, and then you'd still be able to get to a powerful spell card like Dimension Fusion to help you close the game out. Another major edge that Mark had was with his theory crafting, for you see Chris Perovic, who was the runner-up at Shonen Jump Houston, actually helped Mark construct this build. With that, you had two of the most accomplished Diamond Do Turbo players in the entire TCG working together for a masterful build to take down the meta. At the next two Shonen Jump championships in Montreal and Anaheim, Diamond Do Turbo would have respectable showings, making it into the top 8 of both events, including Chris Perovic once again, but it was never able to recapture that lightning in a bottle that it once had, that dominant performance that Mark Glass had, showing the entire Yu-Gi-Oh world of what the deck was fully capable of doing. In the end, Diamond Do Turbo only won a single Shonen Jump championship, but during that crazy format in which we saw 7 different decks win 7 different jumps, I'm not sure that any deck was going to be a repeat champion. It just wasn't in the cards. So hopefully you guys enjoyed my Diamond Do Turbo story. If you guys do like these Yu-Gi-Oh stories about past decks from the old eras of Yu-Gi-Oh, let me know in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.